Airlines in recent years to build a global fleet and become one of the world's leading airlines.
This airline is growing faster than anyone expected. But let me give you a bit of context. Ethiopia is a landlocked country surrounded by 6 neighbors, sitting on high altitude plateau in the Horn of Africa. And right here at 2,300 meters above sea level is Addis Ababa, its capital. Let's zoom in a bit and you will have Bole International Airport, and the airline that flies out of it flies to 144 destinations across 6 continents. Last year, it made $7.6 billion in revenue. It carried 19 million passengers. It operates the largest cargo in Africa, and by the number of countries it serves, it is the 4th largest airline in the world. It reaches more cities inside Africa than any other airline by a wide margin. This is Ethiopian Airlines. And right here, 40 kilometers south of the capital, they are building a new mega international airport. By 2040, Ethiopian Airlines plans to operate 403 aircraft, carry 64 million passengers a year, and generate $29 billion in annual revenue. To do it, they are building a brand new mega international airport, the largest aviation infrastructure project in African history. And this is where the story gets interesting. In 1945, when Ethiopian Airlines was founded, Ethiopia looked very different. The vast majority of the population was illiterate, modern education was almost non-existent, there was no university, aviation infrastructure was minimal, just a basic airstrips in the entire country. The starting fleet was 5 second-hand military planes the United States no longer wanted. In 80 years, this airline has grown from an old war planes on a dirt runway into the main gateway for air travel across Africa. So how did this happen? How did a state-owned airline in one of Africa's poorest countries become the most successful aviation business on the continent? And what does it mean for the rest of Africa that they are about to build the biggest airport the continent has ever seen? To understand how Ethiopia ended up running Africa's most successful airline, you have to start in 1941. That is the year Ethiopian and British forces drove Italian occupiers out of the country, ending 5 years of fascist rule. Haile Selassie returned from exile to a nation that had been deliberately stripped of infrastructure. The Italians had built some roads and airport at Addis Ababa, but they had built it for themselves, not for Ethiopians. When the emperor returned, he inherited a country with almost no industrial base, no national education system, and a geography, vast highlands cut by deep gorges that made overland travel brutally slow. Selassie understood something his contemporaries didn't. In a country shaped like Ethiopia, the future was in the air. In September 1945, the Ethiopian government signed an agreement with Trans World Airlines. The American carrier would provide pilots, mechanics, managers, and operational expertise. The Ethiopian government would own 100% of the equity. The first fleet was 5 surplus Douglas C-47S, the military version of the DC-3, war-weary aircraft that United States government sold off cheap after the conflict. American pilots flew them. American managers ran the company. Even the general manager came from Trans World Airlines. But the contract was clear from day one. This was a transition, not a partnership in perpetuity. On April 8, 1946, Ethiopian Airlines launched its first scheduled service Addis Ababa to Asmara to Cairo. By the end of that year, the airline had expanded to Djibouti, Aden, and a domestic route to Jimma. In 1951, it was flying internationally to Nairobi, Bombay, and Jeddah. And then came the institution that would change everything. In 1956, Ethiopia opened the Aviation Academy. In 1964, it added Africa's first dedicated pilot school. The mission was simple: train Ethiopians to run their own airline. It was an audacious goal in a country where most of the populations were illiterate. But by 1971, the airline's 25th anniversary, Ethiopian Airlines was managed and staffed entirely by Ethiopian personnel. The first Ethiopian general manager, Colonel Semret Medani, took over that year. The Trans World Airlines management contract was downgraded to advisory in 1970, and by 1975, the relationship ended. Think about what that means. In 30 years, Ethiopia had built something other African countries with more wealth, more infrastructure, more colonial inheritance had completely failed to build: a national airline, profitable, fully run by its own people. The next steps would be whether they could keep it. In September 1974, a military regime called the Derg, led by Mengistu Haile Mariam, seized power in Addis Ababa, toppled Emperor Haile Selassie, and turned Ethiopia into a Soviet-backed communist state. The Derg launched what it called Red Terror, a systematic campaign of mass political violence that killed tens of thousands of Ethiopians, most of them students and young intellectuals. By late 1980s, Ethiopia was at war with itself. Almost every state-owned enterprise in the country collapsed during this period. Sugar mills, cement plants, textile factories, institutions that had been Ethiopia's industrial backbone simply stopped functioning. Ethiopian Airlines did not. Through 17 years of Marxist rule, civil war, and economic collapse, the airline kept flying. It kept turning a profit almost every year, and it kept doing something that should have been politically impossible. It kept buying American and Western European aircraft. In 1979, while Mengistu's government was deepening ties with Moscow, Ethiopian Airlines bought Boeing 727s. In 1984, it added the Boeing 767, becoming one of the first African operators of the wide-body. The airline's leadership argued that the Soviet aircraft couldn't meet international safety reliability standards, and that European airlines needed to be measured against global carriers, not regional ones. The government let them have it. That's the unusual part of this story. Through every regime change, Selassie's empire, the Derg dictatorship, the EPRDF coalition that overthrew Mengistu in 1991, the current administration under Abiy Ahmed, Ethiopian Airlines has been protected from political interference in a way that almost no other African state-owned enterprise has been protected. The airline operates at arm's length from the government. Its CEO answers to a board, not a minister. Its hiring is meritocratic. Its accounts are audited internationally, and its earnings, over 90% of which are generated in foreign currency outside Ethiopia, make it one of the most important sources of hard cash in the entire Ethiopian economy. That commercial discipline, more than any single aircraft purchase or route launch, is the foundation of everything that came next. In 2005, Ethiopian Airlines launched a strategic plan called Vision 2010. It was modest: grow the fleet, expand the network, train more pilots. 5 years later, the airline had already hit every target it set. So it raised the bar: 120 aircraft, 90 destinations, 18 million passengers a year, all by 2025. It achieved all of that in 2018, 7 years ahead of schedule. Here's how. In 2011, Ethiopian Airlines joined Star Alliance. It was the first sub-Saharan African airline ever admitted to the world's largest airline alliance. The move connected the carrier to global code-share network spanning Lufthansa, United, ANA, Singapore Airlines, and dozens of others. In 2012, Ethiopia became the first African airline to operate the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. It will later become the first African operator of the Boeing 777-200LR, the Airbus 350-900, and several other modern types. Today, the airline operates Africa's largest 787 fleet and one of the largest A350 fleets on the continent. But the fleet modernization was only half the strategy. The other half was something less visible and much harder to copy. It's called the multi-hub strategy. Most national airlines fly out of one country. Ethiopian Airlines flies out of 5 through equity partnerships and management contracts. Ethiopian Airlines operates secondary hubs in Lome, Togo, with regional carrier ASKY, in Lilongwe, Malawi, with Malawi Airlines, in Lusaka, Zambia, with Zambia Airways, and in Kinshasa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, with Air Congo. This is what the carrier calls its Pan-African strategy. Instead of trying to fly every African route from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia uses partner airlines in West, Southern, and Central Africa to feed traffic into its global network and to keep African passengers from having to transit through Dubai, Doha, or Istanbul to reach other African cities. Then there is the academy. The Ethiopian Aviation Academy, now Ethiopian Aviation University, has trained pilots, mechanics, cabin crew, and dispatchers from more than 52 countries. It runs 8 full flight simulators. It opened its second campus in Hawassa in February 2023. It is the only training center in Africa offering multi-crew pilot license program. When Rwanda, Tanzania, Chad, Madagascar, and dozens of other African nations need to train aviation professionals, this is where they send them. Add it all up and the picture today looks like this. Ethiopian Airlines operate a fleet of around 147 aircraft. They serve 145 international destinations and 22 domestic ones, including 65 cities across Africa, more than any airline on the continent. It employs over 26,000 people. It has won the Skyrack's Best Airline in Africa award 8 years in a row. In the financial year ending July 2025, it generated $7.6 billion in revenue, an 8% increase on the previous year. It has been profitable almost every year for nearly 2 decades, including through COVID-19. This is what an aviation empire looks like, but it is also an aviation empire about to outgrow its home. By early 2020s, Ethiopian Airlines had a problem most airlines would love to have. It was running out of runway. Bole International Airport in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's home base for nearly 6 decades, was designed for 22 to 25 million passengers a year. After more than a decade of double-digit annual passenger growth, it was approaching that ceiling, and there was no room to expand. Bole sit inside the city of Addis Ababa, hemmed in by neighborhoods, infrastructures, and terrain. Ethiopian Airlines could either accept a hard cap on growth or build something new. It chose to build. About 40 kilometers southeast of Addis Ababa, in a place called Abusera, near the city of Bishoftu, the airline acquired a vast piece of land. The site sits roughly 400 meters lower in elevation than Bole. That elevation difference matters more than it sounds. Aircraft taking off from Addis Ababa altitude 2,300 meters have to operate with reduced payload because the air is thinner and engines produce less thrust. From Bishoftu, fully loaded aircraft can take off carrying more cargo, more fuel, and more passengers. It opens up direct routes that don't currently work for Bole, including non-stop flights to North America with full payloads. Ethiopia commissioned the project to Zaha Hadid Architects, the late British Iraqi architects firm, working in partnership with regional engineering consultancy Dar Al Handasa. The design is staggering. The terminal will measure 660,000 square meters, roughly the size of about 90 football pitches, 4 piers extending from a central spine inspired by Ethiopia's Great Rift Valley. Bishoftu's mild climate allows last section of the terminal to be naturally ventilated with open courtyards and walkways. Phase 1 will deliver 2 runways and capacity for 60 million passengers a year. Full build-out will add 2 more runways, parking for 270 aircraft and capacity for 110 million passengers, more than the world's busiest airport, Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson, which handled 106 million in 2025. The price tag for the Phase 1 is $12.5 billion. Here's how it gets paid for. Ethiopian Airlines is putting up 30% of the equity, around $3.2 billion, from its own balance sheet. Money the airline has earned from quarter century of consistent profit. The remaining 70% comes from debt. The African Development Bank has committed $500 million directly and is leading the effort to raise the remaining $8 billion or so from international lenders. The United States, China, Italy have all entered financing discussions. As of late 2025, $4.8 billion had been formally pledged. The project officially broke ground on January 10, 2026. Ethiopian Airlines has allocated $610 million for initial earthworks, which the country's infrastructure director has said should be completed within a year. The main contractors are scheduled to begin work in August 2026. When Bishoftu opens, it will be the largest airport in Africa. It will give Ethiopian Airlines a physical infrastructure to chase its Vision 2035 target. 271 aircraft, 207 international destinations, 65 million passengers a year, and a place among the world's top 20 aviation groups. But the stakes are bigger than one airline's growth plan. For decades, the easiest way to fly between African capitals, Lagos to Nairobi, Dakar to Johannesburg, Accra to Cairo, has often been to fly through Dubai, Doha, Istanbul, or Paris. The hubs that connect Africa to itself have paradoxically sat outside Africa. That's the transfer of revenue, jobs, training, and economic gravity from African aviation to Gulf and the European carriers. What the Ethiopian Airlines is building at Bishoftu is, at minimum, an attempt to change that. An African hub designed by African Airlines, paid for in significant part by African capital, intended to handle the freight and passengers flow that will follow from the African Continental Free Trade Area. If you love definitive African infrastructure stories like this, please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comment section what you think about Ethiopian Airlines. See you in the next one.